The first plasma bolt tore through the observation deck at 0300 hours, killing Lieutenant Chris Hamilton before he could even reach for his sidearm. The Krathian assault fleet had dropped out of hyperspace without warning, their weapons already hot, their targeting systems locked onto the mining outpost designated as Waypoint 7. Commander Nicole Rivers dove behind a control panel as the second volley ripped through the station's outer hull, explosive decompression sucking 2 more crew members into the void before emergency bulkheads slammed shut. "All hands! Combat stations!" "This is not a drill." Nicole's voice cut through the chaos as alarms shrieked throughout the facility. The outpost housed 47 civilians, mostly miners and their families, along with a skeleton military crew of 12. They had no warships, no heavy weapons, nothing designed to repel a full-scale military assault. Waypoint 7 was a peaceful operation, extracting rare minerals from the asteroid belt in the outer rim, far from the nearest Earth defense grid. The Krathians had chosen their target well. Or so they thought. Ensign Marcus Webb scrambled to the communications array, his fingers flying across the emergency broadcast system. "Mayday, Mayday. This is Waypoint 7 under hostile attack. Repeat, we are under attack by unknown forces." The words felt hollow even as he spoke them. The nearest Earth patrol was 3 days away at maximum burn. They would all be dead or captured long before help arrived. Through the shattered viewport, Nicole watched the Krathian vessels circle like predators, their sleek hulls bristling with weapon arrays. 6 heavy cruisers and twice as many fighters, all bearing the distinctive crimson markings of the Krathian supremacy. She had studied them at the academy, knew their reputation for ruthless efficiency and their complete disregard for the laws of war. The Krathians had been making aggressive moves along the frontier for months, testing Earth's response times, probing for weaknesses. Apparently they had found one. "They're launching boarding pods," shouted Private Danny Chen from his position at the sensor station. 12 pods inbound, impact in 90 seconds. Nicole's mind raced through impossible options. The station had small arms in the armory, enough to arm maybe 20 people who knew how to use them. Against Krathian shock troops in powered armor, they would last minutes at best. But surrender was not an option. She had read the reports from other species who had encountered the Krathians. Prisoners were taken only for interrogation and experimentation. Civilians were considered acceptable casualties, or worse, entertainment. "Marcus, did the message get through?" she demanded. "Affirmative, Commander. Full distress beacon is active, broadcasting on all emergency channels." He paused, his face pale in the red emergency lighting. "For whatever good it does us." The first boarding pod struck the station's docking ring with a metallic screech that resonated through the entire structure. Nicole heard the cutting torches begin their work immediately, slicing through the reinforced doors like paper. She grabbed a plasma rifle from the emergency locker and tossed another to Marcus. "Listen up," she called out to the terrified faces gathering in the command center. "We hold this position as long as we can. Every second we buy is another second for our people to evacuate to the core shelter. Danny, seal all internal bulkheads except the main corridor. Force them into a killing ground." The Krathians breached the outer door with explosive charge that sent shrapnel ricocheting down the hallway. Through the smoke and debris, Nicole saw the first armored figure step through, its helmet sensors glowing an eerie yellow in the darkness. She squeezed the trigger, and the battle for Waypoint 7 began in earnest. What the Krathians did not know, could not have known, was that Marcus Webb's distress call had not simply been received and logged by some distant monitoring station. It had been intercepted by something far more immediate, far more terrifying than any conventional military response. The message had reached the Emergency Response Network, a quantum-linked system that connected every human outpost directly to Earth Defense Command. And Earth Defense Command did not negotiate with those who attack civilians. The moment the alert registered, protocols 3 centuries in the making began to activate. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in hardened bunkers that had never been needed since the resource wars, weapon systems came online. Targeting solutions were calculated, Authorization codes were entered by people whose faces showed no emotion, only cold determination. The Crethians had made their choice. Now humanity would make theirs. In orbit above the Crethian homeworld of Kreth Prime, life continued as normal. The planet's population of 4 billion went about their daily routines, unaware that their military had just crossed a line that species far older and wiser had learned never to cross. The Crethian High Command celebrated in their war rooms, watching the feeds from Waypoint 7, pleased with the efficiency of their forces. They saw it as a demonstration of power, a message to the upstart humans that the frontier belonged to the strong. They had 90 minutes left to live. The Crethian shock trooper fired a burst that shattered the control panel beside Nicole's head, showering her with sparks and molten metal. She rolled left, came up firing, and caught him in the joint between his helmet and chest plate. The trooper went down hard, ichor leaking from the wound, but 3 more pushed forward to take his place. The corridor had become a nightmare of plasma fire and screaming, the acrid smell of burned flesh and ozone thick in the recycled air. "Fall back to checkpoint Beta," Nicole ordered, firing covering shots as her team retreated. They had managed to hold the initial breach point for almost 10 minutes, but the Crethians were bringing in heavy weapons now, crew-served plasma cannons that could cut through the station's internal walls. Danny Chen took a hit to the shoulder, spinning him around, but Marcus grabbed him and hauled him back before the Crethians could finish the job. The humans fell back through a series of choke points, each one costing the Crethians time and casualties, but the outcome was inevitable. Nicole's combat computer showed the tactical situation in brutal clarity. 14 more boarding pods had attached to various points around the station. Crethian forces were systematically clearing sections, herding the survivors toward the central core. Standard suppression tactics. They wanted prisoners, at least some of them, probably to parade before their people as proof of their military superiority. "Commander, I'm getting some weird readings on the long-range sensors," Marcus called out between bursts of return fire. His console was still partially functional despite the battle raging around them. Multiple hyperspace signatures inbound, but they're not matching any known profiles. The energy signatures are massive. Nicole risked a glance at the display and felt her blood run cold, but not from fear, from recognition. She had seen those profiles once before, during a classified briefing at the Academy, a lecture on theoretical weapons that supposedly existed only in contingency plans. The instructor had made them all sign non-disclosure agreements before showing them the data. At the time, Nicole had thought it was just scare tactics, a way to make fresh officers understand the stakes of modern warfare. She had been wrong. "Oh my God," Marcus whispered, his eyes wide as he processed what he was seeing. "Those are planet crackers. Those are actual planet crackers." The term was informal, almost slang, used by military personnel to describe Earth's most closely guarded secret. The official designation was Orbital Kinetic Strike Platform, but everyone who knew about them called them planet crackers because that was exactly what they did. Massive tungsten rods, each one the size of a small building, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed and dropped from orbit. The kinetic energy released on impact was equivalent to multiple nuclear weapons, but without the radiation, without the fallout, just pure devastating force that could shatter continents and boil oceans. Earth had built them after the resource wars, after humanity had learned the hard lesson that sometimes the only way to ensure survival was to have the capability for total annihilation. They were supposed to be deterrents, weapons so terrible that their mere existence would prevent conflict. In 300 years of space exploration and colonization, they had never been used in anger. Until now. "How many?" Nicole asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of another Crethian breaching charge exploding somewhere deeper in the station. Marcus checked his readings twice, as if he could not believe what he was seeing. After 6 platforms, all converging on a single set of coordinates. He pulled up the navigation data and felt his hands start to shake. "Commander, those coordinates are Kreth Prime. They're targeting the Crethian homeworld." The battle for Waypoint 7 suddenly seemed very small, very insignificant. Nicole understood what was happening with a clarity that was almost painful. This was not about saving them. The response time made that mathematically impossible. The platforms had been launched within minutes of the distress call, perhaps even seconds. This was about something far more fundamental, far more primal. This was about sending a message that would echo across the galaxy for generations. Attack human civilians, and your species dies. The Creathian commander leading the assault on the station was named Treknor, a veteran of 30 campaigns, decorated for his efficiency in suppressing resistance on a dozen worlds. He directed his troops with practiced expertise, minimizing his own casualties while maximizing enemy losses. The humans were fighting harder than he had expected, showing a determination that bordered on fanaticism, but the outcome was never in doubt. His forces controlled 70% of the station. The remaining humans were trapped in the central core with nowhere to run. Threkner allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This operation would be studied at the War College, used as an example of perfect small unit tactics. His career would advance significantly, perhaps even a position on the high command staff, away from the tedium of field operations. His communications officer interrupted these pleasant thoughts. "Commander, we are receiving a priority transmission from Fleet Command. They are ordering immediate evacuation." Threknor's mandibles clicked in annoyance. "Evacuation? We are in the middle of securing the objective. Tell them we need another hour, 2 at most. Sir, the order is marked Emergency Alpha 1. All forces are to withdraw immediately and jump to Rally Point Sigma." The communications officer's skin had paled to a sickly gray, a sign of extreme stress in their species. "Commander, they are recalling every ship in this sector, every ship in all sectors. They are calling everyone home." Something cold settled in Threkner's chest, a feeling he had not experienced since his first combat deployment decades ago. Fear. Why? What is happening? The communications officer looked at him with eyes that held knowledge of something terrible. "Sir, Earth has launched a retaliatory strike. The fleet is being recalled to defend the homeworld." He paused, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "The humans are attacking Kreth Prime." For a moment, Threkner could not process the information. It made no sense. Kreth Prime was 300 light-years from Earth, deep in Krethian-controlled space, protected by the largest defensive fleet in this arm of the galaxy. The humans would need to commit their entire military to even have a chance at a successful assault, and such an operation would take weeks of preparation, months of logistical buildup. It was impossible. "How long until impact?" he asked, his mind already calculating transit times, wondering if he could make it home to his family. The communications officer checked his console, then checked it again. "Sir, the estimated time to impact is 72 minutes. He looked up, his expression one of complete incomprehension. "But that is impossible. Nothing can cross that distance in so little time. The physics do not allow for it." Threkner felt the universe shift beneath his feet. Whatever was coming for his homeworld, it was not a conventional attack. The humans had deployed something new, something that broke the rules of warfare as he understood them. He thought of his mate, his offspring, the billions of civilians who had no part in this military operation. They were all about to pay the price for his actions, for the actions of the High Command. "Recall all boarding parties immediately," he ordered, his voice hollow. "All ships, prepare for emergency jump to Kreth Prime. Maximum speed." As the Krethian forces began their panicked withdrawal from Waypoint 7, Nicole Rivers watched them go from the battered command center. She did not feel victorious. She felt numb. Marcus was still monitoring the platform's progress, providing updates that no one really wanted to hear but could not stop listening to. "They're entering the Kreth system now. Defensive platforms are engaging, but the platforms are not slowing down. They're just absorbing the fire." Marcus's voice was mechanical, distant, as if he was reporting on a simulation rather than actual events. Krethian fleet is moving to intercept. Energy signatures indicate they're using everything they have. Still not enough. The platforms are through the defensive perimeter. Nicole closed her eyes, but she could not shut out what was happening. Somewhere across the vast distances of space, 36 weapons of unimaginable power were falling toward a planet full of people who had never hurt anyone, who probably did not even know humans existed until a few hours ago. Children would be playing in schools. Workers would be at their jobs. Families would be having meals together. All of them about to die because their government made a catastrophic miscalculation. Impact in 5 minutes, Marcus reported. 4 minutes. 3. The sensor displays showed the Krathian homeworld in perfect detail, transmitted by the platforms themselves with cold efficiency. It was a beautiful planet, Nicole thought. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling in atmospheric patterns. Not so different from Earth, really. A place where people lived and loved and dreamed of futures that would never come. 2 minutes. 1 minute. Nicole found herself counting down the final seconds in her head, unable to stop herself. 30. 20. 10. The displays showed the first platform entering the atmosphere, its surface beginning to glow from friction, but its course unwavering. 5. 4. 3. 2. 1. The impact was visible from orbit, a point of light that bloomed across the surface like a miniature star being born. Then the second platform hit, and the third, and suddenly the entire planet was lit up with impact points, scattered across every continent, every ocean. The kinetic energy released was beyond comprehension, each strike measuring in the hundreds of megatons. Shock waves raced across the surface at supersonic speeds, shattering cities, boiling seas, throwing massive amounts of debris into the atmosphere. By the time all 36 platforms had struck, Kreth Prime was dying. The planet's crust had been fractured in multiple places, magma fountaining into the sky. The atmosphere was on fire, superheated to the point where nothing could survive. Tidal forces from the impacts had triggered earthquakes and volcanic eruptions across the entire globe. Within hours, the planet would be completely uninhabitable. Within days, it would be nothing more than a cooling ball of rock. All traces of the civilization that had once thrived there erased as if they had never existed. The Krethian fleet arrived 30 minutes too late. Threkner stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched his homeworld burn. Communications channels were filled with screams, pleas for help, desperate final messages from people who knew they were about to die. The planet's defensive grid had been completely overwhelmed. Evacuation was impossible at this scale. 4 billion people, his entire species' homeworld, reduced to ashes in less than an hour. "Get me a channel to Earth," Threkner said quietly. "I will offer our unconditional surrender." His communications officer shook his head. "Sir, we have been trying. They are not responding to any hails. They are not acknowledging our existence." Because there was nothing to say, Threkner realized. This was not a negotiation. This was not a warning. This was extermination, delivered with mechanical precision and absolutely no mercy. The humans had answered the Krethian assault on their civilian outpost with the complete annihilation of the Krethian homeworld. The message was clear, brutal, and impossible to misunderstand. You touched our civilians. Your species dies. Reports began flooding in from Krethian colonies and outposts throughout their territory. Human forces were emerging from hyperspace at every population center, not attacking, but simply appearing, weapons hot, making their presence known. The implication was obvious. The homeworld was just the beginning. If the Krathians wanted to continue fighting, every world they held, every station they operated, every ship they flew would be targeted. Complete eradication was not just a possibility, it was a promise. "Broadcast on all channels," Threkner ordered, his voice breaking. "All Krethian forces are to cease hostile actions immediately. All weapons are to be powered down. All ships are to remain in place. and await human instructions. He paused, looking at the burning world below. The war is over. We lost. Back at Waypoint 7, rescue ships began arriving 2 days later. Medical teams, engineers, supplies to repair the damage and treat the wounded. Nicole and her surviving crew were hailed as heroes, their desperate last stand against overwhelming odds, held up as an example of human courage and determination. Medals were awarded, promotions were granted. The 31 survivors of the original 47 civilians and 12 military personnel were given full honors. Nicole accepted the recognition with quiet grace, but inside she felt hollow. She had not saved anyone. By the time the battle started, the decision had already been made, the response already launched. Everything that followed, all the death and destruction and suffering, had been set in motion in the first seconds after that distress call went out. She thought about the Krathians often in the months that followed. Not Threknor or Horus soldiers, but the civilians. The children who had been playing in schools when the sky caught fire. The workers who had been at their jobs when the ground opened beneath them. The families who had been sharing meals when their world ended. They had not attacked Waypoint 7. They had probably never even heard of it. But they paid the price anyway. The galaxy learned its lesson quickly. Within weeks, every spacefaring species had updated their military protocols to include one absolute rule: do not engage human civilian targets under any circumstances. Do not fire upon human colonies. Do not attack human outposts. Do not even threaten human civilian vessels. The price for such actions had been demonstrated with absolute clarity. Trade routes that had been hotly contested were suddenly open to human shipping. Border disputes that had simmered for years were resolved in humanity's favor without protest. Territory that other species had claimed for decades was quietly abandoned when human colonists arrived. Nobody wanted to test whether Earth's response to the Krathian attack had been an anomaly or a promise of what would happen to anyone who made the same mistake. The Krathian supremacy, which had once controlled dozens of star systems and commanded fleets that numbered in the thousands, was reduced to a handful of colony worlds and a scattered refugee population. Their military dissolved, their government collapsed, their entire society fractured under the weight of what they had lost. They became a cautionary tale, a warning written across the stars in letters of fire and ash. Earth's leadership never officially acknowledged the attack. There were no press conferences, no public statements, no explanations offered. The planet crackers returned to their hidden positions, their existence once again becoming classified information that only a select few were allowed to know about. But everyone knew anyway. Everyone understood what humanity was capable of, what they were willing to do to protect their own. Nicole eventually returned to active duty, accepting a position as executive officer on a deep space exploration vessel. She told herself that she wanted to see what was out there beyond the frontier, to be part of humanity's expansion into the unknown. But really, she just wanted to be somewhere far away from reminders of what had happened. Somewhere she did not have to think about burning worlds and dying civilizations and the terrible mathematics of mutually assured destruction. But on quiet nights during long voyages between stars, she would stand in the observation deck and look out at the infinite darkness. And she would remember. She would remember the moment that distress call went out, the moment that sealed the fate of billions. She would remember watching Kreth Prime die, knowing that she had been the catalyst for that destruction even though she had never fired a shot at the planet itself. And she would wonder if there had been another way, some path that could have been taken that would not have led to such absolute devastation. But she knew the answer. The protocols that had been activated were 3 centuries old, built into the foundations of Earth's defense strategy long before she was born. They represented humanity's collective decision about how to respond to certain types of threats. She was just the person who happened to be present when those protocols were triggered. The galaxy moved on because it had no choice. Ships continued to travel between stars. Trade continued. Colonies were established. Life went on for the species that remained, albeit with a new and profound understanding of the consequences of attacking human civilians. Kreth Prime became a dead world orbiting its star in silence, a monument to the folly of underestimating humanity's resolve. In the end, what remained was a simple equation that every species in the galaxy now understood. Human civilian outposts were protected not by walls or weapons or fleets, but by the absolute certainty of annihilation for anyone who attacked them. The message had been sent, received, and permanently encoded into the calculus of interstellar politics. Touch human civilians, and your world dies. Not metaphorically, not eventually. Immediately and absolutely, with a precision and lack of mercy that defied comprehension. The Krathians had learned this lesson at the cost of their homeworld and 4 billion lives. No one else wanted to be the second test case. And so an uneasy peace settled across human space, maintained not by diplomacy or mutual understanding, but by the cold logic of deterrence and the memory of a planet that burned for the crime of its government's ambition. Years later, historians would debate the morality of Earth's response. Some would argue that it was excessive, that the destruction of an entire planet for a single military action was the very definition of a disproportionate response. Others would contend that it was the only possible answer, that any weakness shown in protecting civilian populations would invite endless attacks from species who saw humans as soft targets. But Nicole Rivers, who had been there when it started, who had fought in the corridors of Waypoint 7 while her world prepared to wipe another from existence, she knew that morality had never been part of the equation. This was about survival in a hostile galaxy, about establishing boundaries so absolute that no one would dare cross them. Right or wrong did not enter into it, only the cold certainty that humanity would do whatever was necessary to protect its own, regardless of the cost to others. She carried that knowledge with her for the rest of her life, a weight that never lightened, a burden that could not be shared with those who had not been there. She was one of the few people alive who had witnessed both sides of that terrible day, who had seen both the desperate fight for survival at Waypoint 7 and the cold execution of planetary destruction against Kreth Prime. The galaxy had learned its lesson. The question that haunted Nicole was whether humanity had learned anything at all, or if they had simply proven that they were willing to become monsters to fight monsters. She never found a satisfactory answer. Perhaps there wasn't one. Perhaps some questions were meant to remain unresolved, echoing through the darkness between stars like the screams of those who died when Kreth Prime burned. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. It would never happen again. Not to a human outpost, not to human civilians. Because every species in the galaxy now understood the price of such actions. And that price was too high for anyone to pay twice.